Welcome to the Open Apple Podcast, where we celebrate the Apple II. Whether you're a longtime user, a nostalgic visitor, or a newcomer to the community, join us as we share news and memories of Steve Wozniak's most famous personal computer.
Hello and welcome to Open Apple. This is episode 43 for January 2015. Happy New Year from Quinn and Mike at Open Apple. Speaking of Mike, how are you?
I'm good, Quinn. How was your holidays?
Oh, it was excellent. I spent some time with the fam up in Can, which is Canada for the non-limerically inclined. And yeah, it was great. It was cold, but lots of fun. And got home in time to do some retro computing stuff, which I'm still working on as we speak. And, well, not as we speak. I put down the power saw in order to record the show here. But yeah, otherwise, it's been really great. How about you?
Well, first, before I answer, I did have a question for you because for as long as I've known you now, you've been threatening that when you get back there, you're going to have to dig your 2GS out of the basement and get your discs and all that. How did that go? Your excavation?
Yeah, so I did. In fact, I went up there this time with noble intentions. So for anyone who doesn't know by now, yes, my family is up in Canada, where I'm from. And my parents' basement contains all of my Apple II goodies, which they have, like the wonderful parents they are, they've loyally kept clean and dry and stored all these years from house to house. And so there is an Apple II Plus and a Laser 128 and an Apple II GS with many floppy drives and hard drive for the 2GS and lots of other goodies. There's a joystick. I've got a trackball. There's a couple of mice. Lots of fun stuff and reams and reams of floppy disks. And there's just no way, unfortunately, that I can get it all down here where I live in California. So I've been thinking, well, maybe I can at least go up and rescue some of the floppy disks. And
Sure.
So I thought this time I will do that. And unfortunately, I just didn't have any room at all in my luggage. So yeah, so I failed in that mission. But occasionally my parents do come to visit me and they like to drive. So the next time they come to visit, I'm scheming to bribe them into loading all that stuff into their truck and bringing it down here. But we'll see.
Either that or you can take like a CryoFlux card or something like that up there with you and just image the diskettes while you're there.
I could, yeah. That would be tough, actually, just the way that the stuff is pretty buried. But I did do some digging, and I just sort of verified that it's all still there, including some of the more critical items like the 2GS monitor, which of course is very important. Yeah, it's all there. The one thing I actually didn't do, which I'm kicking myself for forgetting to do. I wanted to take the cover off the 2GS and just look at that battery.
Oh, yeah. Very important.
And honestly, my plan was to just cut it off right now, whether it's, leaking yet or not. Because as we all know, those batteries, there's only two kinds of 2GS batteries, ones that are currently leaking and ones that are imminently going to leak. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know which I have yet. I'm scared to crack it open and maybe I'll find a big old mess down there. But luckily, all of the equipment is stored in a cool, dry place, and so it's about as well stored as one could hope for, so I'm relatively confident it will all still be there. But yeah, I am looking forward to doing some digital archaeology on all those floppy disks. There's just, years and years of school projects and, learning to program adventures and things stored on all of them that, along with hundreds of pirated games. But it's the personal stuff that would be fun to go through. So yeah, so the TLDR is I failed. Maybe next year. So how about you? Any Apple II related news in your holiday season?
Well, if you pay attention to the Facebook Apple II enthusiast group, you will see that I posted a picture of a gift that my father actually tracked down for me. It's a die-cast 1/18th scale miniature Porsche 935 K3 dressed up in the Apple-sponsored livery of the 1980 Le Mans 24 Hours race. That was very cool. And I'd seen this before online and thought, gee, that's kind of cool. But there were only 3,000 of them made, and they sold out quickly, and they retailed at like $170. So it wasn't something that I was going to buy for myself. And he managed to track one down for less than that. And when I got it, obviously having something in front of you is a lot cooler than just the pictures. And there's certainly, when you get it, you open it up and get to play with it a little bit. Yeah, it was really neat. I was very impressed. So thank you, Dad.
Yeah, I have to say the pictures of that thing, as of course a retro Apple fan and a racing fan, the pictures of that thing melted my brain. It is amazing. I had no idea that Apple ever sponsored a race car. So yeah, to see a race car all covered in the stripy Apple logos was just, yeah, I was blown away by that. I had no idea.
So here's the thing about that, and it would make sense because it was made by True Scale, which is a company that makes these, miniature die-cast models for collectors, that they would market it to the collectors of miniatures. Because if you read through that thread, you can see that, some people obviously knew what this was, but a lot of Apple II fans had no idea that they had done this. And so I imagine most of those 3,000 mini Porsches ended up in collectors' hands. Now, it's actually not a bad thing because I think a lot of dealers and brokers bought them, like 20 of them. And because you can find them pretty easily on eBay for, $100 to $120. So if you really want one, they're out there. They're not hard to get a hold of, even brand new unwrapped. It's a little pricey, but for the Apple II fan who has everything, as far as the Porsche itself, so Steve Jobs is known, later in life as having been a fan of that, of Mercedes, and he had that 55 SL or whatever it was. He drove without plates and would park in handicapped spots all over the place. But earlier in his life and career, he was a fan of Porsche. And in fact, when the Mac came out and he was trying to motivate the sales team, the top sales people would get, I think it was, he gave away 944s or something like that. So he does have the history with the Porsche. And when this car debuted in 1980 at the Sebring 12 Hours, Jobs was there. And I'm not sure how this sort of slipped through the cracks, other than it has nothing to do with computers, other than that they sponsored this thing. For those who don't know, they keep track of these cars in the history of the supercars, the racing cars, by the chassis serial number, because, they get banged up and parts get replaced, and new sponsorship comes on and it gets repainted and things like that. So this actual chassis as an Apple car raced several times in 1980, and then it was repainted as a Red Roof Inn or something like that. Became several other things before in its life. So there are some videos out there online of an Apple 935 K3, which apparently, so in Europe right now, I guess there's this car that looks like one, but I guess it's not. It's a copy. It's a tube car with the livery painted on. But other than that, and an original, does have a 935 K3 engine in it, but it's not the same car. But it's still kind of cool if you want to see, I guess, what it looked like and things. The videos are there, and it's fun to take a little diversion down this weird side path of Apple history.
Yeah, we'll try and link to some of those videos maybe in the show notes, because it is fun to see that. That's quite a popular thing to do actually with vintage racing, is to sort of pick a popular or an interesting livery from the time and recreate it. So you can at least get the gist of what it looked like. In fact, my own racing team, we've got a Lotus that we have run in both the John Player Special livery, and we're currently running it in the Gold Leaf Lotus livery for that reason. So, and a lot of BMW racers use some of the classic Andy Warhol liveries and other various M Division liveries that they used. So, it's that thing is really, really cool. So, and as you say, it's probably if not now, soon will be available, probably relatively inexpensively, because most of them are probably going to, Porsche collectors who are notorious for wanting to have every version of every particular model of every livery of every car. So, Porsche diecast collectors are famous for having walls and walls of apparently identical looking 911s and 944s and 935s. So somewhere out there's probably one of those who doesn't even care about retro computers, but would let it go for a reasonable price. So, that's very cool though.
The thing is, I guess the one in Europe I don't know if it's been banned from the tracks, but there's a couple of blogs out there that both kind of make a sort of hazy mention of the fact that A, this is a copy, and B, the guy that owns it is not telling people that it's a copy. I don't know if he's actively lying about it. That wasn't the impression I got. It was more like, well, he's okay if you believe this is the original car. And I think the tracks and the rules over there are pretty stringent about that sort of thing. And so I don't know if he got himself banned because they found out that he was not telling the truth or what the deal is, but I guess it hasn't been racing there as recently. But the videos are still up, and it's certainly a rush, because a couple of them are like dashboard cams of other cars chasing this car around the track, and so you get to actually see it in action. It's a lot of fun to watch, actually.
Yeah, I wonder what the story is there. I mean, if he's campaigning it in vintage racing, he certainly wouldn't even make it through tech inspection. I mean, they would have certainly caught that instantly. So I wonder what the story is there. Usually getting banned from races is frequently political as much as anything. Maybe he took the wrong people out to dinner or something. Who knows? So, so moving along, I guess, I wanted to, before we move into some of our normal segments, we've got a really cool interview coming up and lots of news to talk about. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Sean Vahey at A2 Central.
I've heard of that site.
Yeah, haven't we all? To me, it's just hands down the number one Apple II news site, and it's certainly bookmarked in my browser, and I go there regularly. He had expressed recently on Facebook that the site was taking a lot of time and a lot of energy, and he wasn't sure if people still appreciated it or not. And I hope that he knows that we do. I certainly do. So if any of you are wondering where to go for Apple II news, you should go to a2central.com. And we've linked to that indirectly for lots of stories here on the show, and I'll link to it again right here just for that reason.
So in 2011, maybe, I'm not great with dates. Basically, Sean asked me if I would take over as sort of the lead technical editor for A2 Central to post all the stories and stuff. And he would still manage the back end of the site and take care of, the CMS and things like that. But, and I agreed, and I made it for, I think, a year, maybe a little bit longer. And man, it is a lot of work keeping that thing updated and keeping track of the stories. And of course, when you're doing that, you're competing with Bill Martins over at Call Apple. Hi, Bill. So you want to get the stories up first. And it's tough. And so, yeah, definitely, Sean, my hat's off to you for hanging on as long as you can. We do get a lot of our news tips for the things that we talk about on the show from A2 Central and from Call Apple and other sources. But I think it's a really important resource for the community. And if Sean doesn't want to continue doing it, I hope that he can find somebody who will step up and at least help out and maybe lessen the burden a little bit, because it is a ton of work. Yeah,
definitely. I think anyone who's never run a website maybe doesn't appreciate that. It seems like a simple thing, but I've got my blog, and I update that pretty infrequently, but even that, I'm just amazed. Sometimes it takes an entire Saturday to do one little thing on there. Just things go wrong, and software doesn't cooperate, or the server host doesn't cooperate or whatever. So it is astonishingly time consuming to do. So if anyone out there is interested in volunteering to help out with A2 Central, I'm sure that Sean would definitely appreciate it. And we will link to contact info as well if you are interested.
All right. So I guess that wraps up our little intro, and we'll just kind of roll into our interview here. It's with, I guess, how would you describe him? Is he a maker? Is he a hacker? Probably all of these things.
Yeah.
Ben Heck, who we know from the Apple IIgs that he did and turned into a laptop in 2008, and then more recently he turned an Apple I into a laptop. He agreed to sit down. He's been making the rounds, so you may have heard some of this on some of the other podcasts before, but I think you'll find that it's still a pretty interesting interview.
Yeah, we had tried to focus on sort of Apple II related content. Ben has reasonable amount of history there, and he's done a number of projects in the area of Apple II related stuff. So we're really excited to have him on the show.
Yeah, very personable and just a fun interview. He's a great talker. So here you go.
Hi, I'm Randy Wigginton, and welcome to the Open Apple Podcast.
Most of our listeners probably, in fact, I know that all of our listeners know who our interview subject is today. I became familiar with him back in, 2008 or so, when he decided to turn a 2GS into a laptop computer. And I know a lot of other people went, who is this Ben Heck person at the same time? So yes, we have Ben Heck with us. Hello, Ben.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm perplexed by this thing. Sorry, I was typing into my calculator. I'm okay.
Well, welcome to Open Apple.
Thanks. What is Open Apple besides a key on a Macintosh?
Well, we are the number one co-ed hosted Apple II podcast, in fact.
By number one, she means only.
And still number one. Thank you very much. And actually the only Apple II podcast of any description, Carrington Vanston.
Oh.
Sorry, that's an inside joke, Ben. All right, so why don't we roll into some questions here for Mr. Heckendorn. Many of our listeners also know you from your general hacking exploits, myself included. I'm a big fan of your site and your your YouTube channel, rather, that you've got with Element 14 going there.
Thanks for watching.
Brought to you by Element 14. So why don't we start with the new stuff, actually, since that's kind of what prompted this conversation initially. Tell us about your Apple I replica project. How did you get the idea to do that?
Last year, I acquired a ZX Spectrum from Ireland. I'm obviously a big 8-bit computer fan. Anyway, we did this ZX Spectrum project over the course of a few months, basically last summer, and that really got me back in the mood for 8-bit computers. So after I completed that, I was like, what computers have I not done anything with yet? And the Apple I was one of them. Also, the Amiga and the Atari ST, and I guess the Macintosh. But I gotta get through them one by one. So the Sinclair Spectrum, I had rewired the entire computer by hand, which was, kind of ridiculous, but also a fun challenge. Like some people might do crochet or needlepoint or build a ship in a bottle. I like to wire complex circuits by hand. So when I came to the Apple I replica, I'm like, oh, well, this is just a 6502 computer with a strange video circuit. So this is pretty simple. So it was fun to do. And then also, obviously, I'm big in the maker movement, and I like to build things. And the Apple I was, of course, a kit, not a full computer. So I wanted to make something that kind of harkened back to that, wooden box era. That's why I went with a wood motif in my design. So that's kind of why I did it. Also because it was cool.
There is sort of a sub-hobby, I guess, of people replicating Apple I's these days. And I guess it's a target for replication because it's so kind of simple. And one thing I see a lot of on the internet is these 2-chip clones, where people try to clone it with, just the CPU and one other support chip. And your design is similar to that, but you made some interesting choices. For example, I like the use of the propeller to kind of do the video and some of the ancillary tasks. What sort of prompted those particular design decisions about which chips to use and so forth?
Well, I was researching it, and I came across the Replica 1, I believe, is one of the kits you can get.
Yes, Vince Briel's kits, yeah.
Yep, and they were using a propeller, and I actually used that microcontroller in my pinball projects as well as other things, so I was very familiar with it. I was like, oh, I know that microcontroller inside and out. This will be easy. And I wrote my own keyboard scanner. So instead of hooking up a PS2 keyboard, I created a keyboard matrix that would be scanned by the propeller, and then it would send that back. And I still use the, 6532 peripheral interface adapter chip. I use an original one, but I believe I probably could have emulated that with the propeller, given more time.
So did you use like a vintage 6502 off of eBay, or did you use like a modern one from Western Design Center? Or
I bought a vintage one off eBay. By vintage, though, oh gosh, wasn't that old. I want to say it was like a 2002 was the date code. I mean, okay. They still make that stuff. Yeah. I think they still make the Z80 too, don't they?
Yeah, I believe they do. Yeah, and the 6502, they still make it. The modern one is, it's still a 6502. It's got a lot of new features. It's got better, power management, and it's almost kind of a microcontroller, but it'll still run 6502 code, and the pinouts, I believe, are still compatible. So that's
yeah. That company, Western
Design Center, yeah.
Right. Yeah, they were the ones who made the, it was in the Apple IIgs, right? Where it was the same thing that was in the Super Nintendo?
Yeah.
Right? It had a 16-bit mode as well?
Yeah, the 65C816. Now, one of the more interesting aspects of your project is the sort of laptop form factor. What prompted you to do that way?
I've built many laptop-style projects in the past. I famously made a laptop out of the Xbox 360. I've done the PlayStation 3. I did something recently with the Xbox One. I'd also done a Commodore 64, 2 different versions, an Atari 800. Was there something else in there? Oh, the Apple IIgs, as you mentioned. So people, when they think of portable computers, they think of laptops. So that's a fun form factor to do. Also, I had these dodgy LCD screens laying around, and I was like, well, I got to use these things up for something. They're like, 8-inch composite screens. And I'm like, oh, an old computer with a crappy terminal output would be perfect for these screens. So part of it was just to use up some LCDs.
Well, so that's interesting because that actually leads into one of my other questions, which is about the screen. So, a lot of us in the Apple II community are trying to we're always looking for new display solutions because, of course, these old CRTs are dying and they're also just bulky and awkward and annoying. So LCDs are always desirable, but it's getting harder and harder to find, 4:3 aspect LCDs with composite inputs that will display Apple II content in particular, because the Apple II's output is not exactly NTSC, it's sort of NTSC-ish. And so I guess my question for you is how do you go about sourcing your screens, and what kinds of things do you look for? Do you have any tips for people wanting to, find LCDs for retro computers?
So it's not quite like NTSC? It doesn't have the color chroma subcarrier or the audio? What's different about it?
Well,
I guess that's not really answering your question.
Yeah, so the Apple II's composite it relies on artifact color for number one. It doesn't have proper color. It does have the color burst signal, but it relies on artifact color.
Oh, really?
So,
all the color is via artifact? And I didn't know that. I remember that from the Atari 800 days.
Yeah, so that's why it has all these annoying properties in software where, for example, certain colors can't be on certain pixels and certain colors can't be next to certain other colors and so on. So it was all...
So you would get 4 colors. You'd get black, white, and then you'd get the odd shift and the even shift, right?
Basically, yeah. And then Woz ended up adding this other sort of high bit trick where you can squeeze 2 more colors out of it. So it has 6 colors, but there's 2 whites and 2 blacks. And so it's all very strange. But it's sort of like 6 opposing angles in the NTSC signal space, basically. It was all about reducing chip count. So he was able to do all this with a very small number of chips, which is why it's all so weird.
You know, I hadn't realized that there was basically only single bit color on the Apple II. I always assumed it was like 2-bit, like the other 8-bit computers. But I guess it was older than the Atari and the Commodore. So it's not surprising.
He did some pretty clever things with it. He does manage to get 16 colors out of low res, and in fact, the double high res mode is especially face melting because it does 16 colors at nearly high res resolutions, but with it just absolutely Byzantine memory structure architecture that's just it requires a lot of software to work with. But the 2 modes that are especially difficult for modern LCDs to display are the double high res graphics mode and the 80 column text mode. So those are the 2 that we're always really looking for LCDs. So where
would those display on a standard Apple II monitor or not?
Yeah. A standard Apple II monitor has no trouble, or sort of any composite monitor from the period. I don't know what it is, but older monitors seem to be, especially CRTs, seem to be a lot more tolerant of some of the oddities of the video signal. So, but modern LCDs are a little fussier, so you tend to get blurring and instability and so on in the picture.
A lot of the I don't know necessarily about the Apple II, but I know the old game consoles, they were only single field. In an NTSC frame, there's, it's interlaced, right, and there's 2 fields, and they would actually only use one of the fields. You'd see a resolution like 256 by 240, whereas an NTSC frame is like 480 visible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can understand why a modern LCDs are kind of, they want a specific input.
Mm-hmm.
So all these tricks that they use to get higher resolutions is probably why you're having trouble mapping it.
Yeah, it's basically down to how good the driver board is for the panel. And the driver boards tend to, at least for composite, either be not very good or just really fussy about the quality of the signal coming in.
So a Apple II composite video to modern VGA connector would be something people would want to buy?
Very much so.
Yeah, it is. And in fact, the ones that are out there, you can certainly buy composite to VGA converters on eBay and so on, but they almost all don't work with the Apple II.
I guess you'd have to take a look. Well, we just recently did something like that. We found this weird LCD glass from eBay or China or something, and it's this like 4:1 ratio LCD. It's like really wide, and I reverse engineered it to figure out how to get signals to it. That's probably what you'd have to do is you'd have to go through all these. You'd have to put a test pattern on the Apple II and then hook it up to an oscilloscope and basically kind of reverse engineer the signals coming off of it. And then if you could take those signals and put them into an FPGA, then you could remap it for a VGA or HDMI or DVI or some other modern connection.
That's a good thought. There is one fellow in Japan who has a small company called Nishida Radio, and he produces probably some of the best video converters for the Apple II. And he's got a couple of solutions that were possibly developed with a process like you describe. And his adapters are pretty great, but there's quite a huge demand for them. And he's only one guy, and he can only make so many. It's a hobby for him. So there's definitely a market for that. So, so speaking of this problem, why don't we roll into your 2GS? So we can circle back to your Apple I replica later if we like, and we'll certainly link to that in the show notes so everyone can look at that. The Apple II video is challenging, but what's even more challenging is Apple IIgs video. And in fact, this is probably the number one source of conversation about the 2GS in any forum that you might find. And that's how to replicate that video, because it had that really weird 15 kilohertz refresh, horizontal refresh RGB signal. And it's notoriously difficult to replicate. It's similar actually to arcade monitors. It's basically RGB
I was going to say
video.
that's not that weird.
It's certainly weird in the land of retro computing.
Well, you wouldn't be able to hook that up to a modern VGA monitor because the refresh rate would be too low.
Yeah. So, and again, there are some converters. Some of the arcade converter boards do work. But so what's interesting about your 2GS laptop project is that you used an LCD. Can you tell us a little bit about how you made that video circuit work?
Yeah, I believe we just used the composite video output on the Apple IIgs. I mean, apparently it had one. This has been like 6 years ago. I don't remember all the details. Of course, composite and not very good are kind of synonymous.
Yeah, I think so on the 2GS, it's bad enough that it basically renders the 640 by 200 video mode unusable, which is why a lot of people are unsatisfied with it.
That makes sense because, the text would artifact into each other. Like an N might become cyan square, for instance. Yeah, I remember it being acceptable, but you're right. You know what would work? It's kind of small, but you know those Sony PlayStation 1 portable monitors they had? I don't know if you've ever come across one of those.
I remember those, yeah. I think they called it the PS1 or something, didn't they?
Yeah, and they had a monitor. That little monitor, I don't know if they're probably harder to find than they used to be because, time has passed. That thing was really awesome. That thing could take 15 kilohertz RGB in, so you could hook it directly up to arcade machines.
Oh, really?
And it probably would also work with Apple IIgs. It's obviously small in size. Okay, so an adapter that would take the 15 kilohertz RGB signal from a 2GS, and see that would actually be pretty straightforward to make into VGA. You'd basically just have to do a line doubler.
Right, yeah, and that's basically what the arcade adapter boards do, and there are a couple of those that do work with the 2GS. It's the challenges are basically to get the quality really, really high because, of course, the original 2GS monitor just looks beautiful. It's just really, really sharp and nice, and that's, of course, what most 2GS users are used to, so any substitute, if it isn't that good, then everybody's unhappy. So then the other problem is delay, of course, for arcade games. If the adapter introduces any kind of latency into the signal, then it's kind of becomes unusable for some of the faster games.
There's a lot of delay, basically. And, well, modern electronics are actually worse because you have HDMI and that gets converted to your glass. Then you have post-processing going on, so you can have quite a bit of delay. Oh, of course, I'm talking about modern stuff. What was I going to say with the Apple IIgs? Hold on, I'm reclicking my thoughts. Blah, 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 blah. Arcade. Shoot, I completely forgot what I was going to say about the pixels.
It's all right, we'll circle back. Do you have sources that you rely on for LCDs, or you mentioned you have a bunch of them around you're trying to get rid of? Where do you go for that kind of stuff?
Okay, I used to get them from a place called Excel Electronics, which would sell. It was kind of like for high-end car stereo, so they'd build monitors into the cars or, build things into your dashboard. And I really liked them because they had very simple chips. They had PAL NTSC, they had two crystals or some sort of, clock divider to do that. And the prices were reasonable. It's kind of harder to find screens now because that whole small LCD market has been completely gutted by cell phones, which, of course, have LCD screens, but not really anything that you'd use for a hobbyist standpoint. And it's also kind of tough to make, well, at least from my perspective, make anything portable because who wants a 17-inch LCD when you can get a 20-inch for $200 from Best Buy? So it's portions of the LCD market are kind of becoming extinct, at least in my experience. There's a lot of stuff on eBay. That's where I found my weird widescreen LCDs, but then I tried to reorder them and I got something completely different. And the resolution on the box wasn't actually what they were. So it's kind of the wild, wild west. But I've noticed, usually for weird LCDs, eBay's a pretty good solution.
Okay. Yeah, you're exactly right about the LCD, that sort of middle zone of, especially for Apple IIs, people are often looking for something a little smaller. So something in like the 8 to 12 inch range, let's say. And that's a tough range to find 4.3 aspect. And of course, that's the other problem is everything's 16:9 now. So there was this sort of narrow window of time at the end of the 90s where you could still get, 4.3 small LCDs before 16, after CRTs, but before 16:9 took over. So you sort of have to try to find stuff from that sort of 5-year period that also happens to have composite and all the other, various requirements for the Apple II. It's a tough challenge.
If you did an FPGA implementation, you'd probably have like a 1-frame lag or buffer, but you could capture the 15 kilohertz data coming in, and then you could like basically upscale it to fit. And if you had a widescreen monitor, you could basically just letterbox, make the sides black or something.
Sure, yeah. So more on the subject of your 2GS laptop, one of the cool features of it is the built-in compact flash. So did you use like a CFFA 3000 for that? Or it would have been the 3000 back then, but did you use a CFFA for that or?
Oh, I remember I bought something online. That's all I remember. It fit into an expansion slot.
Okay, yeah.
Oh gosh, that was like a million projects ago.
Yeah, we're dredging up ancient history here. So yeah, it looks like in the pictures that it was probably a CFFA, but I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, and I know I had to wire it sideways to make it fit. And I can't remember if I had that. I have another 2GS in my shop I need to do something with. Well, I should say I have the motherboard and the RAM expansion. But I always thought that was a really neat computer. I played that a lot in high school. They had like that. It had some cool games on it. I know it was kind of, I don't want to say a flop, but didn't really make a huge dent in the Apple world, but it was a neat little computer.
It's an odd machine. I mean, yeah, the fans of it are extremely devoted, and the non-fans of it haven't heard of it. So it's one of those weird little cult computers.
Was it expensive when it came out? I know that's kind of a silly question with Apple, but...
Obviously, it was more expensive, I think, than like an Amiga or an Atari ST, and it also came out a little...
It was?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, well, there's your problem.
Yeah, well, and it also came out a little later, and it was a little slower, and the conspiracy theorists in the community are fond of this theory. So there is a theory that it was intentionally crippled so as not to compete with the Mac, but then that begs the question, why release it at all? But it's a funny machine with a funny history, and it was kind of the very tail end of the line.
Yeah, because that was like, 86, 87?
86.
Okay, so the Amiga and the Apple Atari SD were out at that time. And those were like, around $1,100 or $1,200? I'm sure the Atari was like made cheaply.
Yeah, and the Amiga had 68,000 in it, whereas the 2GS had, this kind of barely 16-bit, technically on paper CPU running at, a paltry 2.8 megahertz, and so it was pretty crippled in a lot of ways. And then it had the 2E compatibility, which forced the bus down to 1 megahertz whenever you're touching video memory or various other systems. So yeah, the machine, it had amazing potential, but it had a bit of a boat anchor on it as well, which, these limits could all be worked around with really clever programming, but
I was playing Super Castlevania 4 a couple months ago on the Super Nintendo, and it had some slowdown. And I remember, slowdown was kind of the big joke with the Super Nintendo. So anyway, I was looking at the processor, and I'm like, it only has an 8-bit data bus, even though it's a 16-bit chip. I couldn't believe that. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah, it's sort of Western Design Center's answer to the 68008, when you want those 16-bit instructions, but you don't want to have to run all the extra wires for the address and data bus. It's sort of a way to compromise.
Apple only ran a few print ads for that machine, and most of them didn't even mention the word Apple IIgs in the ad anywhere. It just had a picture of it and what it could do. The 2E had been selling well into the educational market, and we could just sell these 2GSs into that and maybe hold on to that for a little bit longer. And that way it's not competing with the Mac. And because most of the schools that bought it just use them as fast Apple IIs anyway. So
right, yeah.
The 2E, that was the like the flat white one. Is that correct?
No, that's the 2C.
Okay. Which was the beige one, like the ubiquitous one?
That would have been the 2E. That was by far the most popular of the 2 line.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I graduated high school in 1994, and we were still using them in 1994 in computer class. I remember they were still operational. Of course, back then, I guess more time has passed since that than the computer. Yeah, it was 20 years ago, and at that time, that computer would have only been, 17 years old? Mind blown.
The 2E, they sold new at retail up until 1993.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah, the Apple II line had an amazing run. I mean, far longer than any, particular version of the Mac architecture or anything like that. Of course, back then, change was a little bit slower, so a particular architecture could be useful for a lot longer. But the Apple II had an amazing run.
It's funny to look back at those computers, like the ZX Spectrum is another interesting one. Like any game you can think of was ported to that, like well into the 90s. It's insane. Like Street Fighter 2 is ported to the ZX Spectrum.
Wow.
Yeah, so, and, as you mentioned, the Apple II was, obviously even older. It was 77, right?
Yeah, and what's amazing is that the architecture remained basically unchanged for that whole period. I mean, they did some tricks to shoehorn another 64K of RAM into it, and they added some, fancier video modes with, again, basic tricks. But, the fundamental architecture of the machine, it was 1977 technology, fundamentally, all the way into the 90s. So it's, all the way into the 90s, there were still games with that wacky 6-color artifact video and all the rest of it.
Like Oregon Trail. Wasn't there? I remember so I had an Atari 800 when I was a kid because we would have never been able to afford an Apple. And it didn't have to use artifacting, but its high resolution mode, which was like 320 by 240. If you put pixels side by side, or I'm sorry, if you gap the pixels, you would get artifacting. And whether or not you're on the even or odd line, you'd get either, I think it was like greenish or cyan. But then I remember, I believe the PAL versus NTSC, the artifacting would flip. And also if you had an older version of the machine, it would flip as well. So if the Apple II was using the same kind of artifacting, how do they prevent grass from looking like blood or something? Or was it because they always had the same monitors, so it never changed?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. They did manage to maintain a consistent set of artifact colors throughout the entire line and across different regions. But yeah, I'm not honestly sure the details of how some of that worked.
An artifact color would cut your horizontal resolution, effectively half?
Yeah, exactly. So if you wanted to achieve any kind of real colors, that's why, in fact, the double high-res mode, your horizontal resolution was 140 as opposed to, it was 280 in the normal, quote, high-res mode. But that 280 wasn't really 280 because if you wanted to have a solid block of certain colors, you lost half your resolution effectively. So, it's a funny numbers game. But so ostensibly, the double high-res mode is 16 colors on any pixel, but it's only 140 pixels wide. And then there's all the craziness where they literally every other column of pixels is mapped into a different bank of memory. So you literally have to flip memory back and forth to draw a horizontal line. And it gets crazy real fast because of course they didn't have any addressing space for all the extra video memory that was going to be needed.
To be fair, if you had the Commodore 64 or the Atari 800, they actually had colors you could map and change, but it was 2 bits per pixel. And it made the pixels wider, so if you have any sort of like 4-color mode on those, you drop down to 160 horizontal pixels as well, which is also all the faster that NTSC can even change colors, so it didn't really matter.
Back then it was enough, for games, so yeah, nobody was complaining at the time.
Yeah, joystick only had one button, and we liked it.
That's right. We played games uphill in the snow both ways.
Yep.
So one of the things that really stands out about your projects is just the sort of level of polish on the manufacturing of them. So I'm looking at pictures of your 2GS laptop here, and even for one of your earlier projects, the edges are all nice and clean and the materials are nice. So can you talk a little bit about your manufacturing process, what materials you use, what tools you use, that sort of thing?
Sure. At my shop, I have 3 major tools that I use. I have a CNC machine, which is used to mill materials. You can put sheets of material on it and it will cut patterns and concavities. I also have a laser cutter, which is I guess it's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? And that's really good for making highly detailed things if you want to have a good resolution. Like laser cutter can cut with 1200 dots per inch resolution. So if you want text that looks nice, you can put in material. You can actually use the laser to raster and cut the text, and then also cut the material out. So it can score the surface of things, and it can also cut through things. And I've always wanted to put a pizza in it, but I haven't. And my warranty expired a year ago, I want to say. So it's been a year now where I should have put a pizza into it. You know what? I need to clean that thing anyway. It's kind of dirty. I should cook the pizza or cut a pizza with it and then clean it.
Yeah, I think that needs to happen.
It's like microwaving a bowl of soup with the lid off before cleaning your microwave. It's like, well, who cares, right? Anyway, and then another tool that I use, I have a couple of 3D printers. And in the case of the Apple I replica, I think I made the keys with the 3D printer. Yes, I made the keys with the 3D printer and also the hinges. And I also had this jig where I would print the keys in white plastic, white ABS, 3D print them. Then I would spray paint them with black enamel. Then I stuck them in my laser and used the laser to etch the letters in them. So I was pretty proud of that process.
That actually is really cool.
Yeah, so the thing that I find is, use the different machines for what they're best at. Like a CNC machine is good for making large volumes of precise pieces. So like the casing of the Apple replica was done using black Sintra, which is a high density PVC foam. Foam isn't really accurate. I mean, it's very dense compared to foam, but that's technically what it is. So the large machine can use its bits and like carve that out and make pieces that look nice. And unlike a 3D printer where you have to build it up, you can make large things quickly. Then the laser printer, well, I guess, yeah, it is a printer. It's basically a network printer, which is really cool. If you want to make like a nice wood inlay or make a nice wood plate or text, it's really good at cutting precise pieces of wood. Because a CNC machine, you're limited to the size of the bit. Whereas a laser, well, technically the laser has a width. It's like 0.00. It's like about 2,000th of an inch, which sometimes you have to take into account, but not usually. So if you want to do really fine work, you can use the laser for that. And the nice thing about the laser is it's not physical, it's a laser, so you don't have to worry about pushing things around or moving things. You just literally set things in it and they get cut.
Oh, is that right?
Holds them in place. Yeah, because this laser beam just comes down and cuts them.
Yeah, I suppose. I never thought about that, but yeah, that's neat.
Yeah, it's the same thing when they use a plasma cutter on like metal or a metal laser. The metal just sits there usually and it gets hit with a laser. So I find that using multiple different tools can achieve the best results. When I do, smaller projects, if I'm making, some sort of Raspberry Pi portable or something, I'll usually use the 3D printer to make a more complex volumetric case for it. A little beyond what a CNC machine can do. But then I'll use the laser cutter to make like nice looking end caps because 3D printers look good. They can make good looking stuff, but they don't always make like a good front visible surface, but the laser's really good at that. So I like to use multiple tools and then combine them for a finished look. Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. So,
and lots of hot glue.
Yeah, lots of hot glue. So now some of those tools are recent acquisitions though, right? How did you get by without some of those fancier things? Like say for the 2GS laptop, that was in 2008, right? So did you have all those same tools at the time or did you
No, I didn't, but I would just go elsewhere and have it done. So I would pay to have it done before I had my own equipment. But then I bought my own equipment. So now I have a CNC machine and I can set things on it and use it as a table. There's other things I still don't have. Like I don't have a metal laser, nor would I ever buy one because I don't think I could afford it.
Yeah.
But it's if you know people that have one or companies that have one, you can subcontract it out. Although one thing that's kind of tricky is other companies don't want to deal with you because if they can't make 1,000 of something, they don't care.
Right.
And that's an obstacle. I don't know if it's as bad as it used to be because, you have things like Shapeoku or Shapeways and all these services that exist now. So it's not that hard to get into. Oh, and hackerspaces, obviously, they usually have tons of tools that you can use. So it's getting better. And 3D printers are all the rage, and they are awesome. I have like 3 of them, but they can't do everything. So it's about picking the best tool for the job, which sounds like a really generic thing to say, but
Yeah, that's very true. So I'm working on a project with my Apple IIc where I'm building kind of a lid for it. And so it's about, 12 inches square and kind of a shell. And I tried to 3D print it with Shapeways, and they said they couldn't print it. It was coming out warped, I guess, because of the large sort of surface that isn't very thick. They said you said it was 12 inches in one dimension? That's a very large 3D print. Yeah. It is. It's right at the limit of what Shapeways will print.
I'm actually surprised they would even try to print anything remotely that big, to be honest.
Yeah, they have certain materials and certain colors where I think their maximum volume is about 14 inches cubed, but
cubed?
Yeah, something like that. They could only print this in white and only in a couple of materials, but they gave it a college try and fortunately was too big for that. It was worth a try. So on the subject of, you mentioned 3D printing for hinges, might be a little bit inside baseball, but I'm actually interested in your hinges. That's a kind of a difficult thing to make for a laptop because, of course, it has to be easy to open, but then stay, at any position you put it in. How do you make your hinges? Do you have a couple designs that you use, or?
The hinges I used on the replica were left over from Xbox 360 laptop I designed a couple years ago. And that was actually one of the first things I made when I got my MakerBot back in 2012. They're not necessarily a friction hinge. They basically, you just use a screw and you put them through and then they open up to a certain distance and they stop. So they're not, well, actually they are pretty stiff, but they aren't like something like a laptop where you can open it, whatever degree you want and it'll stay in place.
I see.
But they do work pretty good. I can send you the 3D files if you'd like.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be fun. We can share them in our show notes. I've been trying to buy friction hinges for this purpose, and it's tough to find ones that are weak enough. When you buy friction hinges, they're presumably intended for...
they're usually at least 8 pounds.
Yeah, they're intended for like cabinet doors and stuff, things that are much heavier than a laptop lid. So there are some...
Things that involve a lot of leverage.
Exactly.
Literally,
yeah.
to open.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you try to undo a friction hinge by hand, you can't.
Yes.
I mean, you can because it requires a lever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you try to move them with just your thumbs, it seems like, it won't move. And there are some adjustable ones, actually, but they tend to be kind of bulky, so it's tough to find just the right thing for hinges.
Yes, I also designed my own chip clip, because that's kind of like a rite of passage with 3D printers.
Your own, chip clip?
Chip clip, yeah, you got to make a chip clip for the bag of chips.
Okay.
Crisps if you're British.
Right. The like a spring clip that you use to hold the bag closed. Okay.
I always thought that they were too difficult. It's like, oh my gosh, it takes it takes thought to put on this chip clip. So I made kind of like this inverse spring thing. I mean, it doesn't use a metal spring; it's off plastic, but it's on Thingiverse if you want to check it out. I was dialing in a printer. I got a new printer, and I was trying to dial it in. And so I was printing things over and over and over. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to be printing things over and over and over, they don't have to be perfect. I think I would create a bunch of chip clips. So I designed one, and then I think I gave most of them to my friends, but I have one at here. Because the thing is, you don't have to squeeze it. You basically just stick it on. It's kind of hard to explain.
I think I got you. Yeah, because the rolled up plastic bag kind of expands and holds the clip in place. Is that the idea?
Yeah, kind of like that. But it seems to work pretty good. I use it.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I use binder clips for that. Those black things with the little silver.
Oh, yeah. That seems like a pretty simple solution.
Those things are great. I use them for attaching and clamping things all over the house. Half my life is binder clips. Do you have any, sort of changing gears a little bit now, do you have any particular history with the Apple II? You mentioned that you used them to play games in high school. Anything else that comes to mind?
Well, I didn't just play games with them. Mostly school. I'm old enough that I guess there's still Apples in schools, but everything was like an old Apple. As I mentioned, even in high school, we were using the 2Es in computer class.
Yeah.
I do remember when I was a senior, I took Computer 2. I basically took computer classes just to increase my GPA. So I guess I used Apples for that. I remember this now. I would write the program in like 5 minutes or whatever, and then I would spend the rest of the period playing SimCity on the Macintosh. So that was pretty easy.
So Mike, I'm monopolizing the conversation here. You have any questions for Ben?
Oh, I had a comment first and then a question. And the comment is, there's this Monty Python skit called Pet Conversions, where John Cleese walks into a pet shop and he wants a cat, and Michael Palin offers him a terrier, and he says, no, I want a cat. And Palin says, well, I can, I'll let its legs down, take its snout out, stick a few wires through its cheeks, and there you have a lovely cat. And it goes kind of back and forth. And so sort of turning like when somebody has a 2GS sitting there and they look across the room and they see this laptop, and there's a certain psychology that goes, I'm going to turn this into that. And that's always sort of fascinated me. We've talked a lot about the cases and how beautiful they are, and the attention to detail and polish that you put in your projects, and it's undeniably gorgeous. As far as though the electronics, obviously you're going to have to reconfigure boards and cut, and
sometimes, yeah.
What's the process there? Do you have to like remanufacture pieces? Because when you cut into a PCB, you're going to be cutting traces and things like that. What goes on there?
I'm trying to remember how I did it with the Apple IIgs. I guess I don't remember exactly how I did it with that, but I'll tell you what process I would use.
Sure.
You'd look at the motherboard, and then you realize what you absolutely need. If you're modifying something that runs off batteries or it runs off a modern screen, there might be portions of the PCB you don't even need, which means you can omit them completely. You can cut traces as long as you don't use what it's connected to. If you do cut traces or you have to bend it or circuit bend it, you can always rewire them. I got another 8-bit computer that maybe is on your hit list. What was the TRS-80 Model 100, that portable white computer from like 1983? Yeah. So anyway, I got one off eBay or whatever, and I was like, oh yeah, this thing's awesome. But I had to go in, and there's some corrosion on the keyboard. So I had to go in. So even if there are broken traces, you can patch them up. You can add little wires or little snippets of solid wire and fix it. So that's not really a challenge. So if it's something that you try to make something that fits the size of it. So if you've got a 2GS motherboard, for instance, which is fairly large, I would say, and you're like, okay, well, this motherboard is kind of shaped like a screen, so I'm going to rotate it, sideways. Oh, now it's wider than it is tall. So this gives me like a baseline. Oh, and my screen is, 12 inches. So yeah, that's about the same size as the motherboard. So yeah, this is kind of the size of what I'm going to build. The shape of what you have kind of dictates it. And I also like to use original hardware whenever possible. You could just recreate this stuff in FPGA, but it's fun to have kind of like the romanticism of using the original parts and bringing them into the present. And that's why I like making the custom cases. It's kind of like, what would this look like if it had been built back then? Like I did a Atari 800 laptop, and it's all beige and the color's really ugly, but it looks like it, belongs in the 70s.
Right. Yep.
So part of it, half the battle really, it's all about nostalgia. It's like, oh, this reminds me of that time. I have a feeling toward like, oh, this, it reminds me of my youth. It reminds me of how those things looked. Oh, look, it has these certain colors. It's dingy and beige. It has all these pointless vent holes that you didn't really need. It's all about like, bringing that back and honoring the era, but also, putting a new spin on it. And of course, curved rounded corners. I mean, if you look at that stuff now, like you've like a Sega Genesis, there's all this like black ribbing and grooves on it. And like, all it did was look cool and collect dust. It had no function. Maybe it made the case sturdier, but who cares? All the plastic was textured back then. That was insane. I can't replicate that, unfortunately.
Yeah, there was definitely an era of electronics there where everything had to have ridges and reliefs and things on the surface that was supposed to look high-tech or something. But yeah, it was just maddening because it all collected dust.
Well, it was an industrial design trend. Yeah. I mean, you see that. Apple starts a lot of industrial design trends. They pretty much start all of them in computing. You go from one thing. Yeah, I remember like in the late 90s when everything was like neon colored, like, oh, it's a translucent neon colored whatever because of the iMac. Yeah. And, and then everything was white. And then I think, what are we on now? We're on everything's black, I believe. Black is the new black as far as industrial design. I kind of like the brushed aluminum thing that was that was hot right after neon and then before Apple White.
Yeah, I think we're still sort of there. Everything is kind of an aluminum slab now. And I think aluminum slab plus chamfered edges and black or white shiny plastic, I think, seems to be where we're at now.
Yeah, I have a Ultrabook that's it's a black aluminum brushed slab. So it's pretty much exactly what you're saying. Yes, exactly. I like designing in lighter colored materials because they're easy to see when I'm working on them and they photograph well. But sometimes, you have to make something, if somebody like says, oh, it has to be like glossy black, then I'll do it. But usually I like lighter colors.
Yeah.
I'm looking through the different projects that you've done here, and it looks like most of these are either one-time commissions or one-off things. So is this just mostly you're doing this because you can and it's a challenge and you're having a good time, or are you making enough money off of these one-time things that's how you're paying for all of this?
So it used to be that I would build things for customers. People are like, hey, I really want a portable Commodore 64. I want a portable Xbox, blah, blah, blah. And I would, build the same thing over and over. Lately anymore, we spend quite a bit of time on the Ben Heck show. So if we do build something that's usually on the show, it's like, hey, 8-bit computers, let's try to replicate the Apple I. So we kind of build things for the show, if that makes sense. I still do projects for people, not as much as I used to, like individuals. I do a lot of things with accessibility. I'm making all these batches of accessibility controllers for people who don't have full facility of their hands to play modern games, which are really complicated. So I tend to do things more like that. It's one of those things, like, it's the irony, like, as you get older, you get busier and you have more money to build this stuff, but you don't have the time or the machines. Like, I kind of wonder, like, 10 years ago what I would do if I had the machines I have now. I'd probably be like, woohoo! But now it's like, oh man, I don't have time to build all this stuff. And like the time it takes to make something custom, it eats up a lot of time to make one custom thing. Like if you can't make 10 or 20 or 50 of something, it's really not worth the effort. But if we can do it, on the show, kind of as a, a demonstration or basically as entertainment, then it's worth it. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So this Apple One project, then, how many hours would you say you have invested in, from start to finish, from thinking, hey, I could do this, to putting it together on the show for people?
Oh, that one wasn't too bad. I don't know. Maybe 20 hours.
Oh,
maybe
okay.
25. No, it's a very simple, even though I wired it by hand, it's a very simple system. It's 6502 RAM, ROM, addressing chips, some sort of video. Swish, done. This is kind of geeky, but I had a lot of fun creating the ROM image for it. I really enjoyed that, like the Wews monitor that fits in 256 bytes. First of all, I was like, oh my God, how, Wews is a god to do this. But I was like, okay, I put this here. What would that be? FF00 through FFFF. And then, if I want the basic, that would sit here in memory. And I really had fun. What I did was, obviously you can't find a 256 byte ROM nowadays, or EEPROM, but I had a 32 kilobyte EEPROM. So I'm like, okay, let's see. This would be at the second half of memory, and then we put all the RAM at the bottom. And if I'm not mistaken, I would think the original Apple had some RAM at the beginning and some RAM at the end, because you could load BASIC into it. I can't picture the memory map off the top of my head. But it was kind of fun, basically, like going backwards from FFFF in the address space and figuring out where to put everything. Like, I had to put the cassette adapter here. I have to leave a hole for the peripheral interface adapter because that was like at 6,000 hex. Yeah, that part I enjoyed. It was like kind of putting together a hex puzzle.
It's funny what you mentioned about the memory. It's almost hard to buy chips that small nowadays. I did my own retro computer design a while back, and I had that same thing where the smallest EEPROM I could find it was 32K, and I only needed 4K of ROM. So there's literally 4K of code sitting at the top of this 32K ROM. When, of course, back at the time, people would have killed for that much ROM.
Yeah, they would have killed for 32K of RAM too.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is also about but you can still buy it. You can still buy parallel RAM and EEPROMs, and yeah, it's fun.
So sort of related to what Mike was asking about. So of course, I'm a big fan of the Ben Heck show, but of course in that sort of 20-minute format, it's hard to get into a lot of details. So do you have a place on your website somewhere where people can look at the schematics and the hex files and so on and see some of the gorier details?
So we take our project files and we put them on the Element 14 community.
Okay.
Because the main goal of the show is to drive the community and the website, so that's where we put our files. Okay. For instance, we just did one on FPGA, and the editor, Allison, she's like, oh my gosh, we could have made like 2 episodes out of this. So she's like, I'm going to condense this and this and this. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Because like filming me typing code into a computer it's like all these Hollywood movies where they have these scenes involving hackers and computers. Like, this is not interesting.
Yeah.
So what we do is, like, instead of like showing me type everything into the computer, we make that very brief, and then we just make the code available online because that's all people want anyway.
Right. So cool. Yeah.
That's kind of how we handle that. But yeah, we usually make all the files available. So I don't care.
Cool. Yeah, we'll definitely link to that in the show notes. Yeah, it's funny. These projects, the end result is cool, but probably 95% of the process of building it is not good television.
It's like an iceberg. Yeah, you film about 10%, and the other 90% is like the cursing and swearing and kicking things. Well, it's not that bad, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah.
What's that, like 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration?
That's right. Yeah.
That's definitely one of the best axioms of all time. So yeah, we can't film everything because we'd have so much footage, it would be impossible to edit through in a week, and it would be pointless because we'll have like okay, here's how I wire this. Now I have to do it 20 more times off camera. That's usually what happens. Oh, well.
Cool. So I don't think our audience would forgive me if I didn't ask, but the 2GS laptop is a bit of a holy grail for a lot of people, especially regular attendees of Kansas Fest, the annual Apple II conference. And it says, and of course, on your website that you won't be building any more of them, but is there any chance of ever building any more of those?
Well, sure. If someone gave me enough money, I'd do it. I guess, like I mentioned, I have another Apple 2GS motherboard laying around my shop and an extra RAM expansion. So, yeah, maybe someday I could build one. I tend to be working on other things. My workflow is not quite what it used to be. It's not, well, that sounds like I'm lazy. It's not the same. I mean, I'm always working. I mean, as soon as I get done with this, I'm going to go right back to working on my SD card routines. But, yeah, maybe someday.
I want to see an Apple III laptop.
Oh, keep your Apple III nonsense out of this podcast, Mike.
Was Apple III and Lisa two different things?
Yes.
Okay.
The Apple III came out in 1980, and it was sort of at first it was going to replace the Apple II line, and then it became the stopgap until they could get Lisa out the door. The Apple III is more of an extension of Apple II technology, sort of a superset. The Lisa was let's make this GUI. We'll put the Motorola chip in there, and then Macintosh was the effort to make that smaller and more affordable.
Oh, okay. Now I know.
So I was saying how the 2GS is a bit of an odd duck. Well, the Apple III makes the Apple 2GS look like the IBM PC.
Well,
the Apple
I've seen many Apple 2GSs. I don't think I might have seen an Apple II or Apple III once. Heck, I think I've seen Apple Pippin more than I've seen an Apple III.
Yeah, it's the oddest of odd duck computers. But
I have a friend who bought
awesome.
a Newton PDA, like not back in the day, but like decades later off eBay. It was kind of cool.
Yeah, I actually at the time bought a Newton PDA. I was in university at the time, and I spent far too much money that I did not have on that thing because I was very excited about it, and it was probably one of the worst things I ever bought.
Oh no!
Yeah, you could definitely appreciate what they tried to do, but yeah, the technology was definitely not there. It needed to be the iPhone, and it was 10 years too soon for it, or 15 years, I guess, too soon for it.
You should have got a Trash 80 Model 100. You can still talk RS-232. It's amazing.
Yeah, that thing has a real cult following as well. I know that one of our retro computing luminaries, Earl Evans, is a big fan of that. And it's actually still quite popular, that thing. It was a great little machine.
Yeah, I'm glad that I bought one. And I guess they started going up in price because it was on that Halt and Catch Fire TV show.
Yeah, we practically have a Halt and Catch Fire segment on this show. They always talking about tangentially related topics, and we like to pick apart the historical accuracies and inaccuracies, like the nerds that we are.
Yeah, I can't say I've ever seen it. I know that sounds sacrilegious. It's good?
I wouldn't say you're missing a lot. We like to talk about it just because of the subject matter, but as a dramatic show, I wouldn't say it has a whole lot going for it. I don't honestly know if it's even going to come back for season 2.
It's better as computer history than actually as scripted drama.
Yeah, I would say it's fun as kind of a nostalgic time machine. It's fun to see the 80s computers in the background and the 80s clothes and cars and so on, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily succeeding as scripted drama, no.
Oh, so it basically rides on its nostalgia?
So far, yeah. And this is all just my opinion of it, but I haven't been very impressed with the actual...
Oh, in that case, I probably wouldn't be very impressed with it.
Yeah, it's become sort of an exercise in try to spot your favorite vintage computer on the show.
Oh.
Pretty much, yeah.
Well, I kind of thought the same thing. Like all my friends who are married and have kids are like, oh, you got to see Wreck-It Ralph. It's got all this video game stuff in it. I'm like, oh God, it's just giving me a bunch of references to video games that I remember quite well. I don't need a movie to remember them for me. But then when I watched it, it had some of that, but, I was pleasantly surprised. Maybe if I'm really, really bored, maybe I'll watch Halt and Catch Fire. But I have like 50,000 other Netflix shows I'm supposed to get through first, according to people.
Some of that retro stuff does genuinely turn out to be good. Yeah, Wreck-It Ralph and the other one, what's the other one with something or other's the dude that saves the world?
Oh, Scott Pilgrim versus the World?
Scott Pilgrim versus the World, thank you. Yeah, those two movies are actually quite good as movies, in addition to the shameless plugs of video game.
He wasn't saving the world, he was versus the world.
Right, yes, thank you.
Oh, but what about the Adam Sandler movie that's coming out this year, Pixels?
Oh, I haven't heard about that one.
Have you heard about that?
No.
I think it's basically a ripoff of a Futurama episode. Futurama is like the modern Twilight Zone for like getting ideas from. It's like aliens intercept broadcasts from Earth of like Donkey Kong and Space Invaders, and they think they're war tapes, so they attack Earth using like things that look like old video games. It's going to be total nostalgic trash.
Okay.
Sounds like Galaxy Quest.
Yes, except for Galaxy Quest was an amazing film.
That's true.
Galaxy Quest is secretly one of the best Star Trek movies.
Absolutely.
Just like Star Fox is one of the best Star Wars games. No, correction, it is the best Star Wars game. Now we're really off topic. Was there anything else you wanted to cover?
Where can people find you on the web and in the internet spaces and things like that?
On the intertubes. Okay, you can go to www.element14.com/TBHS. That's the Ben Heck Show. You can also find it on YouTube. I also have my own personal YouTube channel, which I rarely update, which is benheck.com, I think, spelled out. It's very strange. It's always annoying when I go to websites and Ben Heck is already taken. Although last night I was at opencores.org and I tried to log in. I'm like, what bleep hole took Ben Heck? And then I'm like, oh, wait, it was me. I just forgot my password. Steam, though. Someone on Steam has Ben Heck. That I had to be Ben_Heck. Anyway, back to topic. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at benheck.com, all one word. And, of course, my website, www.benheck.com.
Awesome. Well, we will link to all of that in the show notes.
Super.
Thanks for joining us today, Ben.
Yeah, we really appreciate having you on the show. It's been great.
Yeah, it's been fun taking a trip down memory lane.
All right. Well, that was a great interview. Thank you, Quinn, for handling a lot of the tough technical stuff. When we were preparing for that, I wasn't really sure what I was going to ask him because I don't know enough about things like industrial design, and especially when you're kind of re-engineering somebody else's industrial design, and then to feel like I could ask intelligent questions. And so I appreciate you stepping in and covering all that.
Oh, not at all. I had the opposite problem, honestly. If you could have spared enough time, I would have made it a 5-hour interview. Just because, as a fellow hacker, builder, maker type person, I'm a big fan of his, and there was tons and tons of stuff I would have loved to have asked him. But alas, he's a busy chap, so we had to stay focused on Apple II.
Fame and celebrities and all that.
So let's talk about some news, Mike.
Sounds good to me.
Get what's new and exciting in retro computing with 2 News.
All right, so I'm looking at our handy-dandy spreadsheet here, and it looks like you have the first item, Quinn.
I do.
You want to tell me about Bill Budge?
Yeah, I love talking about Bill Budge. Of course, he's a legend in the community. I don't think he needs any introduction. One of his more famous products was Pinball Construction Set. And now Bill Budge was, I guess, what nowadays we would call a tools programmer more than a game programmer. At the time, that distinction wasn't really clear yet, but there's sort of two kinds of game programmers. There's people that build games, and then there's people that build tools for other people to build games. And there's a definite division there. You either, you're sort of passionate about one or the other. Most people are passionate about engines and tools or passionate about building games. So I think Bill maybe falls into the tools side of things, because he used to talk a lot about in interviews about how he liked to build things that enabled people to build their own types of games. So Pinball Construction Set was one of his first major forays into that type of thing. He used to talk about, I remember in an interview, he had talked famously that his holy grail was a construction set. He wanted to try and build the ultimate tool set that would let you build other tools. And that was actually a visionary idea in the 1980s. I think nowadays that has basically been achieved with, things like Unity and so on, these sort of very general game engines that we have now. But in any case, the point of all this is that the Pinball Construction Set source code has now been released. Now, before you get too excited, it is the Atari version, Boo Atari. But what's interesting about it is, now as far as I know, the Apple II source has not been released, but it may also be out there. So forgive me if I'm wrong about that. But what's interesting about the Atari version, Boo Atari, is that the Apple II is actually used in the build process. So there's some scripts that actually use the Apple II ROM monitor as part of the building of it. I guess, he probably used whatever he was comfortable with, and being, originally an Apple II programmer, when it came time to port it to the Atari, he probably just, kind of built on what he had for tools. But it's neat to see. So we will definitely link to that in the show notes.
I have memories, vague, haunting memories, I guess, of reading about a lot of developers, and I guess maybe there was some real similarities between the Atari and the Apple II on that level when you're designing, because it seemed to be a common thing, not prevalent, but certainly a noticeable minority of Apple II developers would develop on the Atari and then compile it over to the Apple II because it was an easy translation. I'm not sure. You had to obviously redo the graphics to fit Woz's wonky designs for that. But so that seemed to be a standard thing to do. That doesn't actually surprise me that much.
I think that sort of thing, that kind of mixing and matching, is probably a lot more common than we realize now. I think because those 80s computers were all really strong in different areas. I think that was probably pretty common to use them for different things. So, the Apple II, of course, had the best, 80-column text and the best disk drives and various other things like that. But then, of course, other machines had much better art tools because they had better graphics. So, people would build the art on one machine and, use another machine for compiling, or another machine for, writing documentation or what have you. So I think like I say, this thing was probably more common than we realized at the time. So it's neat to kind of get a little bit of a window into that. Yeah, and we have to remember how interesting it is that they even did the development on these machines. At the time, these were, microcomputers. These were small systems. These are what we would today consider a microcontroller, for example. And so if you were quote unquote smart and or well-funded, you would do something like what Infocom did, where they had a, DEC mini computer that they developed on, and they just cross-compiled for these small computers, because these small computers didn't have enough, memory and disk and so on to compile and run code on the machine and also, test on the machine. So, that would be equivalent to nowadays either, writing code on a microcontroller for a microcontroller, which, would be silly. Of course, you use your laptop to do the actual development. Or on a modern game system, it would be like plugging a keyboard into your Xbox and then running a compiler on your Xbox to develop, an Xbox game, which again is silly. You would never do that. So the fact that people in those days did in fact do that says a lot about how small these operations were and how expensive, I guess, this equipment was for them to buy. So pretty neat.
Now, stand by for a smooth segue coming up your way. Quinn, you have something about a particular microcontroller board that you can buy right now that would be of interest to our Apple II users. Whew, I need to wipe the sweat off.
Wow.
That.
Yeah,
I'm good.
I'm glad I moved to the edge of my seat for that one, because that was almost an actual genuine segue.
I know, right?
Well done.
Very talented.
It's a shame we called all this attention to it, though, and ruined it.
Oh.
So I do, in fact, have some news on a subject that everybody's been waiting for, and I've been getting asked a lot about, and that's the Western Design Center's 6502-based hobby development boards. They have various names. I think they go by the name Accelerator with an X, and they are also known as the 65XX boards and the SXB boards. They have various names, but they've been in development for seemingly forever, and I showed an early prototype at Kansas Fest in 2014, and they are now finally available for sale. Sort of. Sort of, unfortunately. So they are available now on Mouser. I think Jameco might also be listing them, but I'll link to Mouser because that's what I could find. And they are not showing as in stock yet, but they can at least be ordered. So that's genuine progress. What's still unknown is exactly what the tools look like. Last time I looked at them, the prototype tools were sort of some, I have to say, a little bit clunky command line tools for Windows only. Not like the kind of nice GUI tools that you would come to expect with an Arduino or something like that. So I haven't seen the final product, so I'm not going to pass judgment until I do, but you can at least put in a credit card number somewhere and something may happen and you may get a board at some point. So that's progress.
In software news, CiderPress, the Windows disk image management tool that is completely awesome and we wish we had on Mac, but fortunately we sort of do because it runs under Wine, has been ported to, or has been updated to version 4.0.0 D1. Ciderpress has been out for, obviously, I think it's been for, almost 10 years or more now. And as Windows XP and these other technologies are sort of fading into the past and newer stuff's coming around, I think there were some problems with Ciderpress with Windows 7 and things like that. And Andy McFadden, the author, decided it was time to give it a refresh, and he's released 4.0.0 D1, and he says this is a development release. Version 3.0.1 is still the official stable release. From a user perspective, it's feature equivalent to version 3.0.1. But if you are interested, you can go to his website, a2ciderpress.com, and download it and play with it.
Yeah, as a Mac user, I'm very jealous of Ciderpress. It's ironic that the best tool for working with Apple II disk images is only available on Windows.
Yeah, it's sort of unfortunate, but if you're willing to mess around with Wineskin and programs like that, you can get it running, I think, without too much problem. I have it on my running on Yosemite on this iMac that I have in front of me right now, and it wasn't very difficult to set up at all.
Okay, yeah, I have Parallels actually, so I should give it a try under that. I'm a big fan of Parallels. Yeah, honestly, I guess I've got at this point I've got a set of command line commands set up using Apple Commander, the Java tool, and it works well enough for basic stuff. But definitely wish I had Ciderpress for reals.
It certainly makes it a lot easier to deal with that, because you can load up your image and see what's on the disk and mess around with it. It's good stuff. You should check it out for sure if you don't have it already. Have you received Chris Torrance's new book yet, Quinn?
I did, yes. There was some, there was some possible drama there. He sent Mike and I a copy of the book, and yes, thank you so much, Chris. And I was afraid he had sent it to my home address. The neighborhood I live in, there things have a tendency to get stolen off the doorstep when the UPS guy leaves them on the step, which they always do if you're not home, it seems. And so it had been a while, and I haven't received it, and I was getting worried. And then Chris let me know that he'd sent it to my office, actually. So when I went into the office the other day to pick up some things while on holiday, it was there waiting for me. So I have it in my hand right now, and it is beautiful, I have to say.
It is now. He sent us. Did he send you the hardcover version?
He did. Yeah. It sounds like this.
I don't have the website up in front of me right now, but I'm hoping when I use a book like this, it's Roger Wagner's Assembly Lines. You know, it's guides and tutorials and code to help you learn assembly language programming. And when I'm using a book like that to learn, I like to have the Apple in front of me and this thing open next to me so I can reference it while I'm working. And it's sort of difficult to do with a hardback book. I'm hoping that it will be released. If you can get that as a softcover, that'd be great. And having it on my iPad as an ebook would be even better. To just flip back and forth and have it searchable. And so fingers crossed for that.
Yeah, I really like having reference books on my iPad for the searching and bookmarking abilities. Yeah, I have to say, I mean, I think my use of this book will actually mostly be as just an interesting, nostalgic kind of read and maybe learn a few tips and tricks about the Apple II. But I am interested in hearing the perspective of someone who is genuinely going to use it to learn assembly language. Because, yeah, judging by this John Romero quote on the back cover here, it's apparently very good for that. So let me see if I can quote here. It says, "I am not exaggerating when I say I merely read the first few pages in chapter 1 and all of a sudden assembly language totally made sense to me. Very few times in my life have I had such an important event happen to me in a lightning bolt-like form as when I read the first chapter and understood without error exactly how it works." So that's high praise indeed from John Romero. So I'm wondering if you might also have that same lightning bolt-like experience.
I wonder if that's from John Romero of old. Because I would assume that John Romero of 2014 knows very well Apple assembly language and wouldn't have grabbed his copy of Chris's release and just suddenly had this revelation when he's had 30 years to learn.
Yes, I assume that is a vintage quote, possibly from the original edition of the book. I'm not sure. It is honestly, it looks like really a great book for learning. I didn't actually expect that. I thought it was just, I knew it was a collection of the original articles from Soft Talk, so I guess I assumed it would be kind of a mishmash of, pro tips and hidden sneaky tricks and things like that, not necessarily like a read it front to back tutorial on programming the Apple II, but it seems like it actually is kind of that. And just flipping through it, it looks like it is quite good for that. So especially in some of the technical areas that are unique to the Apple II, like, high-res graphics and so on, which can be some of the more challenging areas to learn. You can learn 6502 assembly from 1,000 different sources, and, it's really not that hard. But then once you try to make the Apple II do something, now you have to learn the gnarly memory map and all the other weird tricks and the artifact color and so on. So it does seem to have a lot of that. Unfortunately, of course, the original articles kind of end at the very early part of the Apple IIe, so there's nothing about double high-res graphics or some of the later topics, but still, for what it is, it's pretty remarkable.
Roger Wagner, you'll see that he's got a great way of communicating this information in a no-nonsense way that makes sense pretty much without a whole lot of work. It is assembly language, so there are some math hurdles there and things that you might have to overcome if you're learning assembly language for the first time, but it never feels like it's impossible. And I think one of the big things that he understood that maybe some of these other early authors didn't was that you're more likely to stick to this and actually learn the thing if you're working towards a goal rather than just, here's how we add binary numbers today. And, why am I doing this? So the articles sort of build to help you kind of build a program. I think it's a game or something like that. And for me anyway, that's the sort of thing that keeps me coming back to it rather than okay, I'm learning this, but why? I have, no project in mind. What am I doing here? So
for sure, it's very goal oriented. It's not just here's the weird Apple II high-res memory map and, all the strange things you have to do to draw a horizontal line or whatever. It's you want to draw a sprite? Well, let's work towards drawing a sprite that moves around on the screen so that you can maybe actually make a game, which is really what everyone wants to do. So it's great for that.
I believe Chris may have recounted this when he was on the show, but the rumor was that Roger was basically learning the stuff, a day or two before he wrote the articles because he wanted to learn it as well.
That's awesome. You know what they say, the teacher only has to be 2 days ahead of the students.
Right. So what else we got, Quinn?
Let's see. Well, you got some, oh no. Tell me you didn't label these news items Wews.
I sure did. It's back. It's Wews.
We talked about this. All right. Let's hear your...
I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to make it happen, people.
All right. Let's hear your Wews segment.
Come on, let's go. It's good. I'm going to have a jingle next time for it.
Oh, gosh.
So we mentioned last month that Woz was getting a reality show, and that was going to be based around future tech. And I think the articles that I went back through and researched earlier this week have all said that the show is going to be named The Woz. That's what they're going to call it. And it's going to be with Carrie Byron from formerly of Mythbusters, which I think is very cool. But I don't remember mentioning that last time we talked about it. And I don't know if the articles have been updated later, but for those of you who are listening, the show will be called The Woz, and it will be with Carrie Byron of Mythbusters.
Cool. Yeah. The last time we talked about it, there was very, very little real information about it. So I think all we had was a photo of Carrie and Woz. So that's cool to have a little more information about it.
And our other Wews item, see what I did there?
Stop it.
Is that, Woz has been making noises for a long time now that he wants to become an Australian citizen and then move down there and retire with his family. And because of his busy speaking schedule and appearances and things like that, he's still based here in the United States just because a lot of it happens here. And as part of the process of becoming a citizen of Australia is you have to live there a significant portion of time, and that's sort of been difficult for him. But he did get another step closer to becoming an Australian citizen. He was granted this week status as, well, not this week, I guess a couple of weeks ago, status as a permanent resident because he is a distinguished person, I guess, because of his accomplishments and things. They're willing to extend this to him. So as Woz gets older and moves closer to retirement, his dream of living down there is going to become reality.
Cool. Well, and we've all been searching for the perfect Woz and Oz pun and or portmanteau and or gag. And I think that Michael over on the RCR has finally come up with the perfect one. He referred to him as the Wizard of Oz.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I think that wins. I think that is the official Woz Oz pun / portmanteau / gag. So we can all just agree he's the Wizard of Oz now, and let's move on.
Bill Buckles is a software developer for the Apple II, and it's been a year or two, I think, since we mentioned some of his previous releases. He's come up with some really nifty graphics conversion utilities for the Apple II, turning your old Apple II double high-res pictures into something you can display on your modern machine and back and forth. Well, he has released BMP to DHR 1.0. He's got an extensive write-up of it over at his website at appleigs.ca, and it's pretty impressive, the results he's been able to get with this program.
Yeah, there's a bit of a, I don't want to say competition, but there's a little bit of a friendly competition, I guess, going on with various converters to double high-res graphics. I know that Brendan Roberts has also been working on one, possibly tangentially related to Lawless Legends, but there's been some interesting comparisons online of the two different programs and how they approach different types of colored images and so on. So it's neat to see what can be done. I'm surprised at the quality of them. Some of these images really do look quite good.
And in these threads over at CSA2, Bill has been very open about sharing the information on how he's doing things and the techniques that he's using. I'm still struggling to learn basic assembly language, so a lot of it's over my head, but a lot of it does make sense. So if you're interested in the magic behind how this gets done, I would head over to ComSys Apple II, check out his threads, and check out his webpage. Yeah,
and it's really a lot about just understanding color gamuts and how to convert from one color space to another, and the different techniques there are for doing that, and the different techniques for sampling images down from different resolutions and so on. And there's a lot of overlap with like computational photography types of techniques or graphical shader techniques. So it's almost more that kind of challenge, that kind of color and image processing theory challenge than it is specifically about assembly language. So there's definitely some very sophisticated techniques involved in both of these approaches. So it's very educational.
And the results are outstanding.
They are indeed.
Virtual Apple II, the online emulator that you can play in your web browser as opposed to the Virtual Apple II emulator that runs on Mac OS, has been updated. The database has been updated to version 1.28. Bill Martins over at callapple.com has a post where he talks about many new updates. There's programs, and they've included the manual for David Schmeck's plasma-based game Rogue. So check that out.
It's good to see some love for Virtual Apple II, actually, because it's such a great little thing. I mean, JSMS lately has been getting a lot of press for emulating retro computers in your browser, and well deserved. It's a really awesome effort and an awesome program. But Virtual Apple II, meanwhile, has been quietly letting you run just about every Apple II game ever made, including most 2GS games, right there in your browser for a long time now. So it's been great for us to be able to link directly to a lot of the games that we talk about and so on.
Why aren't you playing games right now?
That's right. Well, because they're listening to our amazing show.
Oh, I see.
Well, they're listening to you anyway. I don't think anyone's listening to me. I'm just here for the Commodore jokes. You know that.
Oh, and they send hate mail to Mike at
right.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I edited that little hate fest that you and the other three put together last month, and just so you know, I heard all that Carrington.
Yes, if only people knew the unedited. Maybe we'll do a special Open Apple Unplugged Raw episode one day or something.
Oh, gosh, you don't want to hear that. Yeah, no. Well, you probably do, but you won't.
So speaking of games, let's talk about Brian Peachy, everyone's favorite prolific modern Apple II game writer. He's been plugging away for a while now, producing games. I guess he's been sort of using it as a way to learn Apple II assembly language, and in the process, he seems to be learning a lot because he's making some cool little games. And he's recently released the source code for his game Lamb Chops, which I think most of us have probably played by now. It's quite a fun little game, and he released the source code for it. He's cautioned us that it was a learning experience, so it may not be the best assembly language code, and I can definitely relate to that. It's it's kind of scary to release your code to the public because, of course, it's easy to criticize other people's code, but it's quite another thing to sit down and write it yourself. So thanks for doing that, Brian. I'm sure lots of people will learn from that.
The quote on Call Apple is that with the release of the new assembly lines book, I thought I'd share the source code to Lamb Chops, which borrows almost entirely from concepts covered in that book. So it seems the important thing for learning a new language or something, pretty much, I guess, anything with this retro computing stuff that's going to take a while to absorb and make progress in is have a goal when you're doing this.
Definitely, yeah. And set that goal reasonably low. I think a lot of people make that mistake when they're learning to program. They set out to make Ultima 5, and right. You can't do that. You should set out to make Pong, literally. I mean, set out to make the simplest thing you can, because then you'll finish it and you'll feel good about yourself, and now you have something you can build on. It's quite demoralizing to set out to build Ultima 5 and you get a third of a map generator built and then you run out of steam and then nothing ever happens with it. So, and then if you do a few of those types of projects, then you never finish anything and you start to get discouraged about starting things. And so, yeah, much better to choose a small game to start with.
Or you get a cease and desist from Origin.
Sure. Either way is fine. Both, valid approaches. Wow, a little callback there to an earlier episode. So yeah, Lamb Chops is actually a great example of a relatively straightforward kind of little game that you could make. Not to say it was easy or quick to make, but it's sort of, it's straightforward in that sense of early Apple II arcade games. What nowadays would call it a casual game, but at the time that was just what all games were for the most part. So, picking something, one game mechanic, fairly straightforward, not a lot of levels, not a lot of fancy sound or effects or anything, and just kind of roll with that. So it's much better to finish something small than to start something big and then it never sees the light of day.
Right. And as simple as Lamb Chops seems, it's still a very effective game. It's one you want to keep playing and coming back to. So just because you're doing a simple project or something that isn't Ultima 5, doesn't mean that you can't do something great that's going to encourage you to continue learning and making progress.
For sure. And if you do want to make a big game and you're in the mood to make something terrible, then there's always Wizardry. That's also an option. I haven't made a Wizardry joke in a while, so I was due.
You deserve that. Yes.
I think I earned that one.
Akalabeth, the progenitor to Ultima and a real RPG on the Apple II as opposed to Wizardry, is now free on good old games, GOG.com. It wasn't Richard Garriott's, quote, first game, but it was the first one that he sold. If you dig a little into the history of Akalabeth, the original title was D&D 28B or something like that. Garriott used to make these games that he would pass around to his friends in high school to play, and Akalabeth was actually the 28th game that he had made, and I think he showed it to somebody at a software store who encouraged him to sell it, and that's how it ended up being in baggies and sold. So, but you can download that for free right now on Good Old Games. There was a deal running where I think there was like 80% off the entire Ultima catalog in December, but that's over now. But you can still get all the other stuff there if you want.
Akalabeth is an interesting thing to play just for the historical perspective, but yeah, fair warning, it's not a great game. It's
kind of crappy.
Yeah, it's no Ultima 5, but you can kind of see the seeds of it there, I guess.
Having had an opportunity to use and play around a little bit on a real Apple One at Kansas Fest 2013, it's easy to see a parallel there because using the Apple One, it's actually really difficult to get it to do very much that's interesting just because it was so limited. And while it does represent a great thing for the beginning of Apple and what was to come later with the Apple II and Macintosh and things, using an actual Apple One isn't all that exciting. And playing this game is sort of the same way. It's, it kind of launched Garriott as Lord British and led to Origin Systems and all of these wonderful Apple II RPG experiences that many of us shared, but the game itself, not so much.
Yeah, he was sort of cutting his teeth, and you can kind of, he's learning new skills that he was going to need to ultimately, pardon the pun, build Ultima 4, 5, and so on, the good ones that we all remember. But, it sort of circles back to what we were saying earlier, where you can't just set out to make Ultima 5. You have to make a whole bunch of Akalabeths beforehand to sort of build up the skills and the knowledge and the experience to do that. And in fact, Jimmy Marr, whose blog we've talked about a lot on the show, talks a lot about this. He's talked about the various Ultimas, and you can kind of see, if you analyze them in the depth that he does, you can actually see Garriott building these skills. Each game gets a little bit better with the writing and better with the character development and better with, the game mechanics. You can actually sort of witness how he's learning how to make a good RPG. And because, of course, he had no real examples to draw from at the time. Computer RPGs, especially the Western style of CRPG, they didn't exist yet. He was inventing the genre for the most part. So it's really interesting to see how he kind of arrived at, what was ultimately a good game. Oh, there I go again. What was ultimately a good game and the model for generations of games to come.
But it's free, so at least you won't be shelling out for a bad gaming experience. So if you want to check it out, yeah, Not going to cost you a thing.
Yep, and any excuse to plug Good Old Games, that's an awesome site. They're doing great work there. So speaking of old stuff, wow, really? That's the segue I came up with? That was, I should have said, speaking of Apple One, because you said the Apple One earlier. That's what I should have said. So we talked to Ben Heck earlier, of course, about his Apple One replica. And there's actually kind of a fad or trend almost of people building replica Apple Ones. And there's a couple that we can link to in the show notes that are interesting. The first one that caught my eye is over on Hackaday. There's someone's built a 2-chip Apple One. So it's a 6502 and a microcontroller. And so this is kind of overlaps with two trends. There's a trend to build replica Apple Ones, and there's a trend to build 2-chip computers. And the 2-chip computer thing has come about because there's now microcontrollers that you can buy cheaply. They're really, really fast and have lots and lots of I/O pins. So what that means is you can make the microcontroller do the job of 20 or 30, 1978 chips. So you can make it do the memory address decoding, you can make it do the storage, and you can make it do the video and all this other stuff. And so all you have to do is kind of attach your retro CPU of choice to it, and you can make neat little 2-chip computers. So someone has done that.
Two great tastes that go great together.
Sure. Let me do the jokes, all right? Jeez. So yeah, this 2-chip Apple One is kind of a neat little thing. And there's also another one. I think this other Apple One replica is your item, right?
Yeah. Dave Cheney has created his own Apple One replica using an Arduino Mega 2560. And over on his webpage, he's got some great photos and a write-up of how he did it and the plans for the software that you can use, plans and software that you can use to make your own.
Cool. Yeah, the Arduino, for anyone who was interested in getting started in hardware, it's hard to go wrong with the Arduino. And in fact, the Arduino Mega is the newest version of it that's got the AT Mega chip on it, and it's actually pretty reasonably powerful. The video circuitry in my Veronica computer project was an AT Mega 328, so it's actually quite an impressive little chip. You can crank it all the way up to 20 megahertz and do quite a lot with it. So nice to see people leveraging that to build an Apple.
And it's great that these microcontrollers, easy for me to say, microcontrollers have stayed relatively low in price. You can get a lot of power for $35-$40. And if you want add-ons to make it even more useful, even those aren't crazy expensive. I remember when back in late 90s, I guess, when there were a bunch of different companies like Diamond Multimedia and I think ATI and NVIDIA were the big ones, but there were a couple of others that all made video controllers, and because of the competition, the prices of the board, like you could get a really good graphics accelerator for $100 back then, and as soon as I think one or two of them shut down, the other two, ATI and NVIDIA, realized, hey, we're the only ones in the games, and the prices on those boards really shot up, and you were still getting kind of the same power. So it's great now that isn't going on with these, the Raspberry Pi and the BeagleBone and things like that.
Yeah, there's really exciting things happening with these small development kits and single board computer kits. And what's great about these chips is not only can you buy cool little development boards like the Arduino for, $20-$30 around the chip itself, if you're willing to forego the Arduino development environment and associated bootloader and so on, once you know a little bit more about how this stuff works, you can buy the chip that the Arduino was built around for like $1. So, I buy them by the handful, and they're super easy to use, and they still come in dip packages, which is fantastic. That's the hobbyist friendly form factor that you can stick in your breadboard and is great to learn with. I don't know how many more years that's going to go on. It's getting harder and harder to get interesting chips in dip packages, but fortunately there's companies like SparkFun that are, make breakout boards so you can put an SMD chip on that and still get your dip form factor. For anyone who isn't familiar, dip is the style of chip that's in the Apple II where there's little legs that stick down, and so they're really easy to work with. Everything's kind of large. They're easy to solder and easy to stick into a breadboard and attach wires to, compared to the modern thing, which is what you'd see inside your MacBook Pro or your iPhone, which is called surface mount technology or surface mount devices. And those have no visible pins, or, sometimes they have little nubs or something. And, they're designed to be placed by robots in, high-speed manufacturing plants, and they're tend to be very tiny and can be tricky to work with. It's still possible to solder them by hand, but it's definitely much trickier and less hobbyist friendly. So, but fortunately, Atmel and Parallax and these companies are still making a lot of hobbyist friendly chips. So get them while you can.
And because of the low prices and sort of the, I guess, open source development tools in a lot of cases, a lot of really strong communities have sprung up around these various platforms. So whichever one you choose, if you get stuck or if you need an idea or you don't understand a concept, it's easy to get help from people who have been there and know and can answer your questions.
Yeah, that's actually a really great point. I'm glad you brought that up. Much like the Apple II, what makes these dev boards great is the community. So you can go over to avrfreaks.com and, find every question you might possibly have answered. And the tool chains are all there. You don't have to spend a dime on tools, which is not very many years ago. That wasn't true. One of the sources of revenue for these companies was they would sell you these chips, but then they would charge you, hundreds or thousands of dollars for their software to talk to the chips and to program them. But now, there's things like AVR Dude and AVR GCC, the compiler and so on, that's just all free. And it's not quite as easy to use in some cases, but again, the help is all out there and plenty of examples. So it's never been easier to get into hardware development for sure.
I found, so if you go to places like a community specifically for arcade cabinet collectors called K-Love, Carrington and I talk about a lot on that other podcast that I do. It can be sort of a rough environment there, especially if you're new and you're trying to figure things out and you ask the wrong question or, not to bash them too much, but, if you're not respectful enough, they will tear into you and make it an unpleasant experience for you. And I have not seen that around these hobbyist boards. I mean, you can go in there as a complete newbie, no experience, no knowledge at all, and ask away. And most of the people are really happy to guide you, handhold you through the process and help out. I've found the communities to be very open and accepting and willing to share, and I hope it stays that way.
Yeah, I think it varies a little bit by forum. Yeah, Clove is a little bit notorious for that. On the development board side of things, Hackaday is a popular blog that covers this kind of stuff, and their forum, their comment threads are a bit notorious for being a little bit trollish and confrontational.
Well, that's because you're a girl.
Yeah, well, honestly, yeah, everyone. There's sort of a divide between sort of the Arduino type of person who's new to this type of thing and, the quote unquote proper electrical engineer who's been doing this forever and went to school forever and knows everything. And those two cultures tend to clash in a few areas, and Hackaday is an area where they clash. But AVR Freaks is great, and there's lots of very friendly types of environments to learn this stuff. There's kind of the more casual kind of what they call the maker movement. And if you kind of stick to those areas, if you're learning, I think they're a little more friendly and a little more, willing to help as opposed to some of the more hardcore kind of electrical engineering hacker type places. So be prepared. It is the internet after all. So be prepared to have a thick skin if necessary. But in general, I think, people are awesome.
Yep. If you're into Raspberry Pi, which is something I've been playing with a lot lately, I highly recommend adafruit.com.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Adafruit in general. They're awesome over there.
Okay, what else do we have?
Let's see. Well, I think the last thing I had was a little bit of shameless self-promotion, as I want to do.
Plug.
Yes, on February 2nd, I'm going to be giving a guest lecture at Stanford about my Veronica computer that I built and showed at K-Fest in 2014. They heard about that and were interested in having me come and talk to their computer science program about it. So I'm going to be talking to their CS 107E class and their Women in Computer Science group. So if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area and can get yourself over to Stanford, maybe you want to sit in. This is probably the last show that will air before that happens, but it is on February 2nd, and I'm sure there's details available from them. I will link to it in the show notes if and when anything becomes available as far as links that I can share.
Well, congratulations on landing that. That sounds like a really cool thing.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I've given a few of these sorts of things, and it's always fun to do it. It's something different for the students, and they're always excited to hear someone besides their, same old professor lecturing at them about the same old things. So the enthusiasm level is always a little higher, and I just like to hear the sound of my own voice, so that's all good.
Well, of course you do. That's why you're on this show.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm looking forward to hearing your report on that. So we'll wrap up today's news, and then we'll get to some user listener feedback in just a minute. But there is sort of an interesting item that I wanted to share about Apple II and retro computing music in general. I'm a big fan of the SID music and things like that. We've talked about Joe Eli's Apple II made album that he released recently, and there was an item on a2central.com. Sean Fahey posted it. It's about this German fellow named Jonas. He goes by Stynx, I think, S-T-Y-N-X, on the various message boards, has set up a page on SoundCloud.com called the Vintage Micro Music. And it's a bunch of different tracks and sounds and things like that he's found on floppies. And it's a lot of fun just listening to that stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, that stuff's always fun to listen to. I like that nostalgic kind of 8-bit music.
Okay, Quinn. I almost called you Karen.
Ooh, wow. First you close our show with the no quarter bumper, and now you call me after a bald loudmouth dude.
Bald Canadian loudmouth.
Well, we're both Canadian, so that's an honest mistake.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
I kid.
Whoever you are at the end of this, at the other end of this conversation.
Who am I talking to? What is this?
That's right.
Where are we? Who are you people? Get off my lawn.
I know that we have some listener feedback. Would you like to share that with us?
We do. Our pleas for listener feedback last episode did not go unanswered. We got some nice feedback this time, so thanks for that. As always, if you're interested in letting us know what you think, you can reach us at podcast@open-apple.net. We always love to hear from you, so do write us when you get a chance. Our first email comes from listener Mike, not the Mike who's at the other end of this mic. Yeah, a lot of mics. So he wrote, last time we talked about leaking batteries and what they can do to your 2GS. And Mike wrote in to let us know about a tip he found on a pinball site. There's lots of overlap between retro computer people and pinball people. And there's a dude called the Pinball Ninja who has this series of videos. Sadly, I can't link to them. They're behind a paywall, but I've never seen them myself. But people do say they are very informative. And apparently he says if you have areas of a PCB that are corroded by battery damage, that you can, once you've cleaned up the corrosion, you can cover them with clear nail polish to prevent the spread of that corrosion in the future. So I had mentioned before that it's kind of like cancer, and that, it comes back sometimes even when you think you've got it all. So I haven't heard about this tip, and I haven't tried it myself, so I'm not sure. It seems plausible because the alkali corrosion reaction does require oxygen. So in theory, if the nail polish seals everything in place, the corrosion should not be able to, get oxygen to spread. I'm not really sure, though. I haven't tried it. So it has a certain plausibility to it, and I'd be interested to see if anyone has given that a shot. So let's see. The next email I have is from listener Tom, and he wrote in to let us know we talked about the Bilestode last month in our Weird Gaming segment. And he gave us an interesting little factoid here. It turns out that Softdisk included this game in issue 84. They did a series of reprinting older commercial titles. And so, yeah, Softdisk did offer the Bilestode at one time, which is pretty cool. Softdisk was a very cool, hip kind of magazine, so it doesn't surprise me that they would publish kind of an edgy game like that. It's neat that apparently they have extensive instructions in it as well, which is very important for the Bilestode. Hopefully everyone saw in the show notes last month, I linked to some instructions for that game if you wanted to try it. It's definitely not the kind of game that you can just fire up and mash all the keys to figure out how to play it. It's you definitely want to RTFM on that one. So thanks for that tip, Tom. That was great information.
I have a vague memory of John Romero at, he keynoted Kansas Fest a couple of years back, and I have a vague memory of him mentioning, because he worked at Softdisk as well, and I think he mentioned that something about it having been published there, and then maybe that's where he discovered it. I'm not sure. So
let's see. Next one I've got is from listener Paul, who writes in to tell us he's a new listener to the show, and he just wanted to tell us that he's loving the show, and he just finished listening to our last episode. He said he got an Apple IIe in 1982. He was a public school art teacher at the time, so that's kind of interesting. I always liked art teachers back in school. They were always the coolest teachers.
The stoners and the hippies.
Yeah, it wasn't until years later that I realized that the distinctive smell in my junior high school art room was in fact weed. So the naivete of my youth. So
not the paint.
That's right. That was not varnish. So anyway, yeah, thanks for writing in, Paul. Always great to hear from new listeners. And let's see. Also, we've got another email from listener Herbert, who who has written in before, and yeah, he just wanted to let us know about the post about A2 Central from Sean on the Facebook Apple II group. And yeah, we definitely appreciate that. We definitely want to give A2 Central the props that it deserves. It's, as we said before, a lot of work, and we really appreciate the work that Sean's doing there. So once again, if you have any interest in helping out with A2 Central, we will have a link where you can do that in the show notes. And he also talks a little bit about Kansas Fest. He's asking for specific dates on whether people are deciding, whether to go or not. There's probably lots of fence sitters in our audience about Kansas Fest. And first of all, let me say, if you're listening to this show, then you definitely belong at Kansas Fest. There's no question. I hesitated for a couple of years, and I wish I hadn't, because not only did I miss the Woz, but I missed lots of other great stuff. So I wish I had gone sooner. It is pretty amazing. We don't have any dates for it just yet for 2015, but as soon as we do, of course, we will definitely announce them here. But for a more immediate response, of course, you can keep an eye on A2 Central, where it will definitely be posted as well.
Or you can visit kansasfest.org.
Well, yes. That would be the obvious answer, I suppose, yeah. I don't know when they traditionally announce the dates. Do you know, Mike?
It's usually right around this time, maybe late January, February at the latest.
Okay, so yeah, in general, it's, the last 2 weeks of July?
I think it's the third week in July. It has a lot to do with, the other activities going on at Rockhurst University, but we've been there long enough now. I'm not part of it. Kansas Fest committee has organized this every year going back to 2005 at Rockhurst. So I think it's they know who we as a group are and what to expect. And so I think it's probably a good bet that it's going to be the second or third week in July, but we won't know probably for another couple of weeks.
Cool. Yeah. So if you want to block out the third week of July or something, that's probably a safe bet. But yeah, for sure, watch kansasfest.org and a2central.com for specific dates coming any day now.
Anything else?
That's all the feedback I have. Do you have anything, Mike?
No, I think that pretty much wraps it up for today. Thank you very much to Ben Heck for taking some time and talking to us about the Apple I and the Apple IIgs laptop project. See that he couldn't remember much about.
Yeah, he did great. That was an awesome interview. I was really glad to finally get Ben on the show. We've had some listeners asking for us to talk to him, so great to have him here.
Yep, and we've got some exciting stuff coming up, so stay tuned.
Joining us now is game designer Bill Budge, who works with Electronic Arts, and the president of Electronic Arts, Trip Hawkins.
Bill, there's quite an array of games out here on the table. And what is it that makes a game successful, or what kind of factors go into the design of a game?
It's really hard to, you can't ask people what they want to see on the computer and what kind of programs they want. I really think that a person writing a program has to have an inner conviction of something and write a program that they want to write and a program that they want to use. When I started writing this program, it was something I really wanted to do. I wanted to see it work. And
where'd you get the idea for say?
I always liked building things, and it was a funny indirect kind of process. I got tired of writing video games. I was really sick of playing them by this time. And I thought, well, it's fun to make video games. I still kind of like to write them, and I bet other people would really like to write them.
You're talking about the Pinball Construction Set.
Right.
And this is kind of a nice game because it actually involves you in the construction of the game itself. It's kind of like a metagame. Is the success of that been pretty good in the sense that, is there a special segment that you're selling to as far as the construction set?
Well, when you start out, yeah, you're looking to the really avant-garde computer users. It takes a while for the message to get out there when everyone is still discovering Pac-Man and a program comes along that's telling them they can build video games. Well, it doesn't register at first, but it's got a slow growth that builds up, and finally now we're getting very good results. So the game kind of craze dies out. This stuff's taken off.
Mm-hmm. Trip, on the business side, what do you look?
Good morning. I'd like to buy a cat.
Certainly, sir. Got a lovely terrier?
No, I want a cat, really.
Oh, yeah. How about that?
Well, that's the terrier.
Well, it's as near as damn it.
Well, what do you mean? I want a cat.
Listen, tell you what. I'll file its legs down a bit, take its snout off, stick a few wires through its cheeks. There you are, lovely pussycat.
It's not a proper cat.
What do you mean?
Well, it wouldn't meow.
Well, it'll howl a bit.
No. Have you got a parrot?
I'm afraid not, actually, Gov. We're fresh out of parrots. Tell you what, though. I'll lop his back legs off, make good, strip the fur, stick a couple of wings on, and staple on a beak of your own choice. No problem, lovely parrot.
How long would that take?
Oh, let me see. Stripping the fur off, no legs. Harry!
Yeah?
Can you do a parrot job on this, terrier straight away?
No, I'm still putting a tuck in the Airedale, and then I've got the frogs to let out.
Friday?
No, I need it for tomorrow. It's a present.
Oh, dear. It's a long job, you see, parrot conversion. Tell you what, though. For free. Terriers make lovely fish. I mean, I will do that straight away. Legs off, fins on, stick a little pipe through the back of its neck so it can breathe, bit of gold paint, make good.
You'd need a very big tank.
It's a great conversation piece.
Yeah, all right. But, only if I can watch.
This has been the Open Apple Podcast. Find more episodes, read our blog, or send feedback by visiting us on the web at www.open-apple.net.
What, the Macintosh is evil or something? Or